Hi there, here's some homework help for pages 473 to 474, starting with number 1. You're supposed to find the square root of 4,900. Now you could start guessing, or you could break this down into the square root of 49 times the square root of 100. This is 7, this is 10, and 7 times 10 is 70. Or you might have looked at that number and seen that because of the 49, you might have suspected that there was a 7 involved there. And you could have tested 70 and you would have been right. Next, we're going to simplify the square root of 75. So you need to break that down into something times something. And there are lots of possibilities. The one that sticks out to me is radical 3 times radical 25. And if that's the case, I don't know the square root of 3, but I do know the square root of 25, that's 5. So my answer is 5 times the square root of 3. Now let's say I had picked a different combination. Let's say I didn't know that it was 3 times 25, and so I picked a 5 because I know that 5 has to go in here because it ends in a 5. Then the other number I would get here is 15. So then I would bring this down because I don't know the square root of 5, and then this would turn into the square root of 5 times the square root of 3. Well, then I can take these two guys together as buddies, and they come out as a 5. So my final answer is still 5 times the square root of 3. It doesn't matter how you break your numbers down. You look for perfect squares and you look for buddies. For multiplication, I like to write it with the dot instead of the parentheses, so I'm going to rewrite this one as 5 radical 6 times 2 radical 14. So it's all multiplication. It's actually multiplication here and it's multiplication here. So I can break everything down and then put it all together at the bottom. So the 5 is just a regular old 5, so he comes down to the bottom. The square root of 6 can be broken down into the square root of 2 times the square root of 3. This 2 is already without a radical, so it comes down to the bottom. And then the square root of 14 can be written as the square root of 2 times the square root of 7. Now what I do is I look for buddies, and I see I've got 2 buddies here, and they're going to come out as a 2. So what I end up with is 5 times 2 times 2, so that's 20. And then the only radicals I have left are the radical 3 and the radical 7, so I multiply those back and get radical 21. Once you get down to your bottom row, you're going to multiply non-radicals together and then multiply radicals together to get your final answer. When you have fractions and you have a radical in the denominator, you have to do something to get rid of that because that's not allowed. So the first thing that I notice is I've got a radical 10 over a radical 2. So I'm always allowed to take division, like a fraction. If they're both under radicals, I can put them together under the same radical. So think of this as 5 over 1 times that radical, 10 over 2. Well, the radical turns into a 5, and that actually is my final answer. There's nothing else that I could do with that. And another one, let's look at number 31. That says 2 radical 80 over 8. Well, when I look at this one, I'm going to simplify. 2 goes in here once and 2 goes in there 4 times. So right now it equals the square root of 80 over 4. Now I can't leave that square root of 80 as it is, so I'm going to come down here and I'm going to do a little bit of work. I'm going to say that's the square root of 8 times the square root of 10, and then that's the square root of 2 times the square root of 4, and this is the square root of 2 times the square root of 5. Okay, so I know the square root of 4 is 2, and then I also have these 2 buddies, So they're going to go together to give me another 2. So all together, I'm going to end up with 2 times 2 is 4 times radical 5. So that means I can take out the square root of 80, and I can write 4 times the square root of 5 over 4. And then I can cancel once more. And it looks like my final answer for this one would be the square root of 5. So sometimes you have radicals to simplify, and sometimes you can simplify by putting radicals together under a single radical.